The first time Emily told me she'd be working late, I barely gave it a second thought. Our careers had always been demanding, hers in marketing, mine in finance. If anything, I understood the pressure all too well. We had built our lives around our jobs, often sacrificing date nights and stolen moments of laughter for deadlines and promotions. But when it happened a third time, then a fourth in as many weeks, something unsettled me. It wasn't just the late nights. It was the way she had started dressing a little sharper, her makeup more pronounced, her perfume lingering just a little longer after she left in the mornings. Subtle changes, easily brushed aside, until I noticed them. And once I did, I couldn't unsee them. Still, I told myself I was being ridiculous. I trusted Emily. We had spent 10 years together, built a home, talked about children, even adopted a dog. A decade of love and partnership wasn't something that unraveled overnight. And yet, doubt had a way of creeping in when everything was quiet. One evening, as we sat across from each other in silence, I decided to address it. The clinking of cutlery against plates filled the space between us before I spoke. "Work been keeping you busy lately?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay light, casual. She looked up, her eyes guarded, her expression carefully composed. "Yeah," she said, reaching for her glass. "Big campaign coming up. Lots of late nights." It was a reasonable answer. A logical one. But there was something in the way she said it, measured, practiced. My gut twisted, but I nodded, letting it go. I didn't want to seem paranoid. That night, as she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a message from Stacy. I knew Stacy, one of Emily's closest friends, but she lived halfway across the country. The preview read, "Tonight was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." My heart slammed against my ribs, my stomach sinking into a pit so deep it felt bottomless. The words blurred in my vision as a sickening realization took shape. I could have confronted her right then. Demanded an explanation. But something held me back, instinct maybe. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. Over the next week, I tested her lies. Called her office, pretending to invite her to lunch, only to be told she was out at meetings. Twice, I drove past her building. Her car was never there. Each time, the weight of the truth pressed heavier on my chest. The breaking point came on a Thursday. She told me she'd be working late again, her voice laced with the familiar edge of exhaustion. I waited an hour before grabbing my keys and heading to her office. Her car was missing. I didn't need confirmation anymore. I already knew. Still, I needed to hear it. See it. That night, I logged into our shared phone account. A number kept appearing in her call logs, a frequent presence in her messages, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't a colleague. It wasn't a friend. My hands shook as I dialed it from a burner phone. A man answered, his voice easy, affectionate. "Hey babe. Missing me already?" I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch between us until he finally said, "Hello?" His tone shifting, uncertain. Then I hung up. The weight in my chest grew unbearable. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak, they all tangled together in a suffocating knot. That night, I lay awake, replaying every moment of our marriage, dissecting every late night, every absent glance, every well-crafted excuse. How long had I been blind? By morning, I knew what I had to do. I hired a private investigator. It didn't take long for him to confirm what I already feared. Emily wasn't just unfaithful, she was living a double life. Those supposed work trips? Romantic getaways. Those late meetings? Intimate dinners, secret rendezvous at his apartment. I could have screamed. I could have raged. I could have confronted her in a storm of accusations. But I wouldn't let her destroy me. No, I had something far better in mind. I wanted justice, the kind that didn't come with rage or reckless actions, but with precision. The kind that left her with nothing but the consequences of her choices. So I gathered everything, photos, texts, recorded calls. Every piece of evidence was meticulously documented, ensuring it would hold up in court. I was preparing for the inevitable divorce, setting the stage for a clean, decisive end. But before I put everything in motion, I had one last thing to do. I wanted to confront him. His name was David. A colleague of hers. Single, smug, and completely unaware of the storm about to consume him. I had no doubt he knew she was married, but I needed to look him in the eye, to see for myself what kind of man helped dismantle a decade of love and loyalty. That evening, I drove to his apartment, knowing she was inside. My heart pounded, but my resolve was unwavering. I knocked, and when the door swung open, there he was, tall, well-dressed, and utterly caught off guard. The shock on his face was almost comical. "Can I help you?" he stammered, his skin paling. Yeah, you can, I replied, my voice cold and measured as I stepped past him into the apartment. Emily stood frozen in the living room, her eyes wide, her face drained of color. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. You told me you were working late, I said, my voice deceptively calm. And here you are throwing away everything we built. David opened his mouth to speak, but I turned on him, my gaze sharp enough to cut. Did you know she was married? I demanded. Or did she lie to you too? His throat bobbed as he swallowed, his eyes darting between me and Emily. I didn't know. I stepped closer until we were almost nose to nose. You knew, I said quietly, my voice like steel. You just didn't care. Emily finally found her voice, but it was weak, trembling. We can talk about this at home, she pleaded. There's nothing to talk about, I cut her off. Reaching into my jacket, I pulled out an envelope and tossed it onto their coffee table. The contents spilled out, photographs of them together, printed screenshots of their messages, timestamps proving every single lie. Emily's hands shook as she reached for the papers, her breath hitching. What are you going to do? She whispered, tears slipping down her face. I met her gaze, steady, unmoved. I've already filed for divorce. You can keep your lover, but you'll lose everything else. I turned back to David, whose face had taken on a sickly shade of green. Good luck explaining this to HR, I added. I'm pretty sure they have a strict no fraternization policy. With that, I walked out, leaving them in suffocating silence. The divorce was swift. I got the house, the car, and full custody of our dog, the only innocent one in this entire mess. David lost his job shortly after HR received an anonymous tip, and Emily was left scrambling for a place to live, her carefully curated reputation crumbling. The first weekend after everything was finalized, I booked a trip. Somewhere warm. Somewhere far away from the wreckage she left behind. As I sat at a beachside bar, the sun warm against my skin and a cold drink in my hand, I realized something. I felt lighter. Freer. For years, I had been weighed down by a marriage that had turned into an obligation rather than a partnership. Emily had shattered the life we built, but in doing so, she had unknowingly given me a gift, the chance to start over, stronger and wiser than before. As for Emily and David, their affair withered under the harsh light of reality. Without the secrecy, without the thrill of deception, they had nothing. Last I heard, she had moved back in with her parents, and he had relocated out of state. Their world had crumbled, leaving them both with nothing but regret. And me? I had walked away unscathed, resolute. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't about causing pain, it's about thriving despite the betrayal. And that's exactly what I did.